dog from school. She left it at our house and we had it for 16 or 17 years.
Well, so you actually lived this?
Yes, I did. And we didn't even buy the dog. She brought it back from college.
Well, I don't want to tell you what this dog is probably going to cost us, but it's like 3,000. Well, I'm not. I just did. So yeah.
Yeah, you did. Oh my God.
Buy a car. Buy a car for this much.
Rabbi, you could have had my dog for $3,000.
You have to get close.
No. I don't know. And then some people say, well, you have to get a rescue dog. And I'm like, I don't know. I know, but I don't even know. It's like, and it's hard to do now. It's hard to set up appointments for rescue dogs and things like, I don't know, whatever. So we looked at it and she's been studying this for months. I mean, literally, I think we gave her 2 months of watching and negotiating and bribing and stuff. It is what it is. I can't believe it. So I honestly, we're supposed
to believe it.
We're going to have our pet service, our animal service is the 24th. And there's a very good likelihood that, the dog will be with us for a week already by then. So I'm not doing it for the pet service, by the way. This isn't a stunt.
Well, no, you actually probably can't bring him or her to the pet service because she needs it or he needs all the shots before he can be around other animals.
How long do you have to wait for shots?
Usually like 2 months, 3 months, something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What if they're socially distancing?
Wonderful.
Have a mask on, more good.
I love it.
She wants to buy clothes for the dog, so she's buying clothes for the dog. I guess she should get a mask for it too. Anyway, she's so excited. I mean, she's getting straight A's. She's dealing with like every other kid with the inconvenience of this, and she just started speech and debate. So, and she's doing really well with that. She's so we're proud of her doing her stuff. Whatever. So,
which daughter is the one that's afraid of dogs?
Rachel. Oh, Rachel's in Boston, so she's not. She's not. Your good memory, Mike. Yeah, she just.
Oh, I remember that.
Rachel does not like. She's a little bit better now, but she used to be.
She was terrified of the sweet little big dog that we had.
It wasn't your dog; it was all dogs. So she had a fear about that. So I'm glad that I don't have to. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that too. But she actually protected us for a long time because Dina, our middle daughter, definitely wanted a dog, and Shira really did too. And so now Dina's like, "You never gave me a dog," and we're dealing with that. But
you can't win, huh?
Other than that, yes. Other than that. So we're going to get started in a second with Genesis, which is where it all starts, where it all begins. And by the way,
so glad.
There is a midrash that Adam, I guess Eve by extension too, but Adam had a dog, that even the first man had a dog. That's there's a one midrash about that. I don't know if that's a real old one, but there is a midrash that even Adam did. But I was going to say that. And obviously we read about animals, taking care of animals in Noah, but it's a weird thing to come back to the beginning, back to the start, and the Torah always is different where we read it, but it's definitely going to be weird this year, reading Genesis and starting back over at the beginning in the midst of COVID. I hope people had a chance to see the last Friday night Shabbat service. We had some more music. We incorporated some music with Josh Nelson. And Josh, we obviously worked with I did a lot of work with Josh for High Holidays, but we incorporated about 10 minutes of music in addition to other people. And we got really good feedback from his Friday night from the music that he had, And I think you're going to like his stuff. We're going to be including it a little bit more in the Friday night services ahead. But there's 2 songs that he's doing this week coming up. And again, I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. And it's going to be, and we're just going to keep adding to the repertoire and to the things that we're offering and to the music. So we hope you enjoy it. And then we're also working on coming up, we're going to do another round of bingo, and we're also going to be doing a round of trivia. We're going to have some trivia nights coming up in November, where we're going to do some trivia contests online, and we figured out the logistics of that. So that should be a lot of fun. And I don't get to compete. I only get to host, but I love the trivia stuff, but I don't get to compete, but I get to watch you all compete and have a good time. So you'll see stuff about that. And
What kind of subjects are we talking about, Rabbi?
Kelly, I see Kelly's on. She's volunteered to help with that, right, Kelly? I don't know.
Yeah, and actually, I'm kind of like multitasking here because it's cultural, religion, pop stuff. I'm working on it right now, some of the questions, and I'm having a good time doing it. So
Make sure you have Dodger trivia.
No,
Jewish, no, there might be, but
Jewish,
when it relates to the Jewish community.
They've always done it on cruise ships, and I love it. On a cruise ship, it's fun.
It'll be like that. It'll definitely be like Jewish style, Jewish style. It won't all be religious stuff, and we're not going to make it all Torah, so that you guys would have a distinct advantage if we did it with Torah. But yeah, it'll be fun, and yeah, it'll be like that cruise ship kind of feeling to it, where we ask the questions, and of course people are gonna fight.
Are we going to have teams?
Fight over it? I don't know. I think you can have teams by your home, by who's in your house.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. That's a good question. We should see if we can do that. I think you might be able to, other than the fact that you're gonna do it through your phone. You're gonna answer the questions through your phone. You'll participate. We're all live. We're gonna be seeing each other through Zoom, so it'd be really fun that you'll actually be able to see everybody. But I think you answer over the cell phones. I'm not sure. It's possible that you could do it with your team and being in different places. We'll look at that. That's a good question. It's a good question, Joyce. So, by the way, is the sound okay? Because I have an air conditioner going in the background. It's one of these external.
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. It's kind of humid down here, but yeah, the air conditioner is going. Anyways, it's wonderful being out of town. I have a whole different set of political campaign ads that are on the television in the background. And I just want to say, as we start, Mike Schwartz, who had given up on the Dodgers after last night, how do you like him now, Mike? So, how do you like?
It's one game, but I'm glad. I wouldn't have a problem if you were right, Rabbi. But it's one game. We'll see what happens tomorrow. If Kershaw,
I think they woke up. They woke up in about the 7th inning yesterday, and I don't.
Man, that first inning, I was getting my flu shot, so I was driving. I was listening to it. What a first inning!
I know. It was crazy. Francine's not on the line. She's probably still watching the end of the game. Francine may join, but as you know, Francine's son is the hitting coach for the team. And I think going into about the first game and a half, Robert was not having a very good time. I shouldn't laugh. I mean, they had not a lot of action on the bases. So,
but it's good to see Muncy hitting again. It's good to see Jock had 4 hits.
Everybody hit today. I mean, Corey Seager went.
No. Taylor didn't.
No, Taylor didn't, but Bellinger and Corey. Anyway, so the good news, and as I told Mike the other night, the only good thing about the Dodgers being beaten game 1 was that the kid who pitched that first game, Max Fried, is a Jewish kid from the Valley, and his hero is Sandy Koufax. So, and he's very proud of his Jewish, Judaism. He's a nice guy. And I promise, whether or not they win, I hope they don't win, obviously, but Atlanta doesn't win. But I might, maybe we'll do he's friends with my brother, David. They're the same age. They played baseball together back in Encino Little League back 10 years ago. And almost 15 years ago, they were very close. They're still close. And I might have him on and we'll do like a little sports Q&A with Max Fried. So no matter what, he pitched a great game. Again, I hope they don't win Atlanta, but in the meantime, he did a great job. So with enough baseball talk and again, keep your eye out for having Max on next month as a losing pitcher. Maybe we'll do some play-by-play during we'll do a Dodger game play-by-play in the World Series, God willing, and he'll be on the line with us. So that's what my hope is. He does like the Dodgers, by the way, Max. He grew up here, so he does like. I think he went to Harvard High School. Anyways, we're going to get into Genesis and start reading and starting at the beginning. And again, we read a little bit last week as we finished on last Wednesday night. We read the end of Deuteronomy and went right back to Genesis, right back to Beresheet, to the beginning. And as we'll look at it today, we'll say it in Hebrew: Beresheet bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. How do we translate that? Well, lots of different ways to translate. Of course, in the beginning is the way the King James translates it. The translation that they use here is a little bit closer to maybe the Hebrew original, the intention of the Hebrew original, which is when God began to create, at the beginning of God's creation. And again, it doesn't say, as we point out, we've discussed before, but we should always kind of relate and kind of think about it. It doesn't say God hadn't created other things yet. It says when God began to create the heavens and the earth. And most people assume that means the beginning of creation. These are the first things that are created. But it is also possible that the Torah's, and again, some of our ancestors as sages assumed that there were other things that were created before, maybe even other worlds that were created before our world was created, or that there was some creation before these words, that these were not necessarily the first opening words of creation. Interestingly, in the speculation of that, the rabbi said, we're not supposed to think about that too much. We're not supposed to dwell on that. We're not supposed to study it. It's not meant to be it's not supposed to be part of what we think about.
It would all be blind guessing.
Yeah, that's true. And I think really that they realize that type of speculation starts to draw people away from the religious questions here, which is what they're really concerned about. The rabbis were not concerned with again, how the earth was created, when the earth was created. They were created with why. The question of why the earth was created, that was their question. That was what they were concerned with. Why is the earth created? And so all of those other things kind of miss the point and distract from this big question, which they really wanted people to focus on, which was why are we here? Why did God make this world? And what do we learn from it? And so they were very worried about people going down other avenues and then missing the point. And it says the earth was unformed and void. Haaretz haita tohu vavohu. That the earth was unformed. That's the way they translate tohu vavohu. It's chaos. With darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water. So the earth is chaos, upside down, kind of wild and waste, all the different translations that we use for tohu vavohu. Chaos, again, is a possibility. And again, God is going over the water. And that's what, again, is kind of in the moment before God says the words, Yomer Elohim yehi or vayihi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And of course it says, God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. and there was evening and there was morning, a first day. And that's the end of day one. So we're going to see there are some themes in this Torah portion. Especially in chapter 1, which is that as God is creating, God is also evaluating creation, and that God is naming, and part of the creation of these things is God kind of making these boundaries and fixing them and making them permanent by naming them and creating these things, even if, as we just read, it's the creation of time. These are things that God creates. Any questions, comments, noticing for the first time, anything anybody wants to point out? No?
It's good.
It is good. Now, somebody recently talked to me about this, called me actually with a question. God starts creation, the work of creation. And it's just good. It's just good. That's not, that seems pretty good. Now, it's interesting because there is a point that at the end, God is going to say, Tov Me'od, it's very good. But he tried, the point he was asking me, doesn't seem like God is that enthusiastic with the creation. It was an interesting point. I guess I never thought about it that way. From our vantage point, obviously this is great. I mean, we get to exist. God already exists, but now we get to exist. Now there's physical substance in the world. But keep that in mind. I mean, maybe there is something there to the fact that so far God is just saying everything's good. And so again, now there's time. We like to point out as we read this that when God made the first day, it says Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker. There was evening and there was day, Yom Echad, the first day. And from that, we derive the fact that we begin every day at sundown. When it says there was evening and there was morning, that means that ever since the first day, time begins at night. The first part of the day is night, and then we go into the day. Mm-hmm. So that's why our day begins at sundown and ends at sundown, for that reason. Also notice the separations. The fact that God used, the word that's used here is vayavdel, that God separated. And the distinctions that God makes definitely are part of the theme of this, of creation, that God is splitting things up. And it's in the splitting up of these things that kind of, the distinctions are part of what makes the creation possible, is separating one thing from another and then saying, okay, day and night are now separate. And that concept of vayavdel, which is right there, vayavdel, is repeated. And it is, of course, the basis for the concept of havdalah, which we do at the end of Shabbat. We kind of go back to this concept from the very beginning of creation, that we separate Shabbat from the rest of the week. We separate light from darkness. We even say Israel is separate from the rest of the nations in the world. So we look at the distinctions as a way to kind of understand God, that there's things that are separated, which is an important concept, especially one could say from this author, from this stream of Torah, which sometimes we call this the priestly author, that the priestly author is more concerned with the differences, recognizing something as tameh versus tahor, something as unclean versus clean. The priestly author is more concerned with distinctions. And for what it's worth, that when we talk about why some people, I would say some people are uncomfortable with some of the Torah language, especially in the priestly author, in Leviticus, why people sometimes get upset with, I don't want to say how people read the Torah being homophobic. Part of the issue with the priestly author and with the Torah, with what we have in the Torah, is that the priestly author wants to recognize those distinctions as holy, that there is something that's holy and there's something that's not holy, that men and women are different. And so, the issue that people have today in reading that is they say, well, it's not, the differences are not light and dark. They're not black and white. They're not night and day. And so this is where people obviously have some issue with the political correct, as a political correct issue, but it is an issue in the Torah, especially with the priestly author, that there aren't a lot of gray areas. So keep that in mind. It's not so much that, again, the distinction is just between men and women. It's really everything that you understand one thing by seeing it against the other, right? You don't really see the black unless it's against the white, and vice versa. And so it's not so much that it's one's bad and one's good, but that you have to have a distinction. You have to have a line and say, well, this is where one thing is and this is where another thing is. So again, it's not maybe as popular for people to say that today, and it's definitely not everywhere in the Torah, by the way, for that matter. But there definitely is in the priestly author and in this strand of Torah, if you will, the difference. All right, so keep that in mind, by the way. And I will point it out when it comes up in this next line, where it says, and the next day it begins, Vayomer Elohim yehi rakia b'toch hamayim. God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water. And there you have the word again, vayehi mavdil bein mayim v'mayim, that God separated the waters. And that mavdil is the same root as vayavdel, that there's a separation. And that line is the separation that you see on the horizon between water and the sky. Even though they're both blue, when you really see it, of course, off the coast, it looks like it's almost the same. And so our ancestors looked at that line and they said, that is the separation line between the water from the sky and the water below. That's the water of lakes and rivers and oceans, and even the water underground that comes through an aquifer and you can drill down and get to from a well. Those are the waters below and the waters above. And of course, this is important because when we read about the flood next week, just next week, you'll see that those waters are unzipped, if you will. And the difference, the line essentially is erased between those waters. And that rakia, that separation, sometimes it's called the expanse here, sometimes it's called the firmament, that line is erased. God pulls it out, if you will, and lets the waters run together. And it says, God made the expanse and it separated the water which was below from the expanse, from the water which was above the expanse, and it was so. And again, the word expanse is the word rakia, which is again also sometimes translated in King James version, of course, is firmament. God called the expanse sky. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Now, so God again names it. He names it Shemayim. God called it. He names it. Now, we want to point out, as we always do when we read this, God never says it's good. God says it's good on every day except for this day. So people say, why? They ask the question, why is day 2 not a good day? Why is day 2 not a good day, right? And the answer is, one of the answers, I guess, the traditional answer that's given is because God undid day 2 at Noah. And so God knew that this was not a permanent thing. And so the sages pointed out that the interesting thing is that God not saying it's good, God didn't keep it permanent yet. He's going to undo it in about 10 generations. There's 10 generations. There's a decent amount of time in the Torah between Adam and Noah, but it's not permanent. So keep that in mind. That is one reason why day 2 is sometimes said there's no judgment that there was good. It was good. God's going to undo it. So maybe by saying it's good, it's saying we're going to keep it that way. Keep it. That's the way it's going to stay. So maybe good isn't so much, I like it, it's perfect, but let's keep it that way. That tov means not necessarily qualitatively good, but more, we're going to keep it. That's the seal. That's the seal on it. So now we come to the 3rd day. God said, let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. So that's why you don't have the waters named before, is because now we're going to have them named. And God saw that this was good. So that's kind of like part 1 of day 3. But yet there's more. But wait, there's more. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit and with a seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 3rd day. Any other questions or points about day 3? I'm moving fast through this because this is only one creation story. We have another creation story to come. But anybody want to point out anything? Any questions or comments? So again, we get
Well, it's all coming from words God said. And as soon as he said it, he used words and created things out of the words that came to him from his mind or his being.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a very important point, Joyce, that the word is what brings forward creation, that God speaks and it was so. And we actually have a prayer that we do in the morning time based on this, which is based on this idea that God speaks and creation emanates from the word. And that's the prayer, the morning prayer that we do. Baruch She'amar, blessed is the word, blessed is saying. And it reminds us that God created exactly as you said, through word and through articulation or as you say, ideation of bringing this forward. And of course, I think the lesson from that, the upshot from that is that we create with our words. We create worlds with our words as well. Maybe not on the level that God does, but because we're like God, we do create with our words. And of course, there are artists and writers for centuries that have created worlds with their words, and the worlds of imagination, and the worlds of
The world of the internet.
literature, and yeah, absolutely. And it is weird to think about. You're right that the internet and all of the stuff that we kind of rely on so much today, including this conversation right here, that behind all of this is code. I mean, there are letters and numbers that are behind every single thing that we do on the internet. That the reality, especially now, of what we're doing on the internet now is all behind it, is all code, is all words. I mean, again, not even words. I mean, to us, if we looked at it, wouldn't even make sense, some of it. But the reality is that there is the power of word. It's a great thing to think about that concept. I did want to put out one thing here. In this case, the creation of the seas and the waters in the land through that separation again, the word there is that God gathered these things together. It's mikveh, mikveh hamayim, a gathering of waters. And that is what we call the mikveh, is where we have people today, when they go through a ritual bath, whether for conversion or through their life cycle, that mikveh is the gathering, it's the gathering of waters. And it reminds us of that initial gathering of waters, that gathering of waters that was the first waters. So that's where the word comes from. A mikveh is not just a pool. It's not we have other words for pool or well. That's not what we call a mikveh. A mikveh is not a well. It's not a jacuzzi. It's not a hot tub. It's a gathering of waters from the very first gathering of waters. So again, we have their gathering, a movement of waters. And here on the fourth day, it begins, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. And there we again go back to that word lahavdil. So we have separations, and in this case, again, ways to distinguish between day and night. So what do the planets and the stars do? It helps us separate and mark time. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. So again, when this was written, right, people didn't think of time necessarily the same way, or at least they didn't think of marking time the way we did. They didn't see the earth rotating around the sun, for example, let's say. But yet they still understood that by looking at the skies, they could mark a year. Now, if you think about that for a second, you'd be like, well, but they didn't have a calendar based on, or a mind based on the earth going around the sun, but yet they still knew how to mark time. And the interesting thing, of course, is that we see the changes of seasons, we see the change of the solar position in the sky. And so we kind of understand that, and they understood that, they saw it. But they also looked up at the sky, and they looked at the position of the stars, and they also judged time, including the passing of years, of when a year started and a year ended, by seeing where the lights were in the sky. And so we know that because the Greeks and then the later Romans, and before that Babylonians and Egyptians, all looked at constellations as a way of marking time. And they looked at the zodiac above them as a calendar above them. So it's interesting that the stars also mark a year. And it makes sense. When you saw where that point was in the sky, that as we went around again, when that point was in the sky again, that was the new year. And that's the way they set time, by day, and of course, by years. And that's what it says, for days and for years. And they serve as lights in the expanse of the sky and shine upon the earth too, right? It was so. And then it says, God made two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day and the lesser light to dominate the night, and the stars. And so again, the sun and then the moon and the stars serve as the marking of those blocks of time, the two blocks of time, the nighttime and the daytime. And again, here you get the purpose of these lights is to help us mark time. What's so amazing about this is that even in the rabbinic period, we've talked about this a few times, the rabbis seem to understand that the stars are also have power, and they represent different nations, they represent global events. They looked at the stars as a way of kind of keeping track of the future, even, if you will, or looking at prognosticating things. But what's very interesting is the Torah itself, and again, the rabbis never forgot this. The stars are there for us, to serve us, and to serve, and through God's creation. They're not there. We don't serve them, they serve us. And this is a very radical departure from paganism at the time, where those lights were seen as our gods. Those almost everybody else looked up at the sky and said, those are the gods. Let's worship the gods. And they literally worshiped the stars. When the star came up and when that star or planet that they were told to worship, everybody worshiped that star. That's Venus. That's whatever. We worship her. She's the goddess of fertility. They did that. And every morning there were people during this period, and for much later on, even into the rabbinic period, there were people who every morning got up and worshiped the sun and said, we praise you, sun. You're our God. You give us life. And Judaism in the Torah established the fact that God created all of those things. They're all there by God's will and by God's order. And God created them all like literally things. And they're there for us. They're not the other way around. Even though they'll last forever or for millions of years, they're not anything other than God's creation, like us, to some extent, to help us. Now, again, we're going to get to this when we read to the end. There's a certain dominance that gives human beings, not, again, at the same level as God, but there is this certain idea that human beings are here to enjoy all of these things that God gave us, including even things as beautiful and as massive and as timeless as the stars.
Rabbi, when was the difference in studying the sky and the stars? When did they differentiate between astronomy, which was the study of stars and their movement, and astrology, which was...
It's a great question, and it really only goes back about 300 years.
Oh, really?
It goes back to the 1700s. You really have to get to Galileo and Copernicus before you get to, and we're talking about the 1700s, and then Kepler and some of the other, Herschel and some of these other, Newton, some of those astronomers and early people studying kind of physics and what we would later call astrophysics. It took a long time, and it really, and for human history, is very recent that people differentiated between astronomy and astrology. There was absolutely no difference. And so people who studied the stars were astronomers / astrologers, and were essentially, even if they were basically there to study it from a scientific standpoint, and there were people who did. I mean, there clearly were, from the early ages, people who attempted to study the stars
and understand them.
Try to understand it. And again, we see that the rabbis talk about it. We have Greek writings and Egyptian writings about this, that people really spent a lot of time, passed on the knowledge. It took hundreds of years for people to look at things. I mean, look, it takes 76 years to see, the comet, Halley's Comet, to be able to understand it and measure it. And it takes 150, 200, you want to say 200 something years to mark it 2 or 3 times and go, hey, by the way, well, let's watch that comet every 76 years. It can come by. I mean, it takes generations to do that kind of study. And they did it. I mean, they knew about these things. I will tell you that as much as there were people who clearly were interested in it, they got funded for it because people wanted to know the future. They wanted to know the astrology side of it. And so they funded the astronomy side. So these people were funded in their research because of that. And again, it's kind of like when we tell somebody today, hey, we want you to go do some research on this because, it's got high scientific value, especially like for stuff for defense. People go, yeah, we'll fund that because it's got some defense application, some greater strategic defense application, but we're going to derive benefit from it as a society because somebody's doing it. And again, as much as people would say, yeah, but that's ridiculous. The guy's trying to figure out when's a good time for us to go to battle or a good time for us to, plant our crops based on things that were not necessarily scientific. Again, some of it is. I mean, some of the things about the best time to plant your crops are based on the stars and based on seasons, which you got to know. But there definitely were some superstitions and some areas there. And it's not that the rabbis didn't recognize that there was possibilities there. They definitely didn't dismiss astrology, but they didn't want people to worship it, and they didn't want
Right.
people to live their lives around the stars. And Judaism really taught us that as much as our future might be in the stars, it's not determined by our constellations, that there are
Right.
not determining factors that make us who we are because of our certain stars. I mean, they understood that there are people who are maybe born lucky, if you will. And they said, look, we know people are going to try to figure this out. When we say somebody's born under a good star, it's, again, it's saying that they must be lucky. They had fortune, right, shining down on them. But they didn't want people to try to, they knew that it was kind of going down a black hole, a hole to try to figure that out. And in the end, they basically said, but it doesn't really matter because we make our own future. We do decide what kind of life we're going to lead, even if there are things that are out of our control. We can't blame our stars for who we are. We'd like them to be good, right? We want people to have good luck and good fortune, but we don't control it. And in the end, it doesn't make our lives anyways, because the way we respond to challenges, the way we create make our own choice, take our own choices and make our own lives, that's what really counts. And so they really did recognize that, yeah, okay, we can't deny it. There are people who are lucky and there are people who aren't lucky.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, that's why we say Mazel Tov. I've mentioned this before. The word Mazel Tov doesn't just mean good luck. That's not what it means. Mazal isn't luck. It literally is stars. Mazal is the Hebrew word for constellations or stars. So when we say Mazel Tov, we were saying good luck. And what we're saying is, to some extent, we hope you have good fortune. That those things that are out of your control, we hope they're good. But there's this other recognition that there's a whole lot that we can't wish you good luck in, that you're gonna have to do that yourself. And so it's one thing to wish a kid or a bar mitzvah, baby, Mazel Tov, wedding couple, Mazel Tov. But there also is this understanding that there's a lot of work that has to get done in order for there to be a good life there. So kind of keep that in mind. The word mazal is constellation. Kochav is an individual
I didn't know
star.
that.
Yep, an individual star is a kochav, is a one star, and mazal is constellations and also planets, if you will. It's mazalot is the Hebrew word for constellations and star patterns, if you will. So we actually call those who worship those things it's oved kochavim v'mazalot. Those who serve the stars, avod avadim, the servants of stars and mazalot and constellations. And the abbreviation for that in Hebrew is akum. And akum is not a good thing. You don't want to be an akum. You don't want to be a servant of the stars and the constellations. It's a bad thing to do. It's another form of idolatry, folks. It's another form of paganism, if you will.
But we are still funding the study of the stars, of studying the physics. We're creating a space force now. We're still paying to study the stars in the universe.
And look, we know that some of our greatest discoveries of the last 50 years have been because of our work on the space exploration. I honestly believe it's one of the most important things for us to spend money on. I think it's a unifying factor. It's one of the things that we can do as a country that's sometimes there's a military aspect to it, obviously, but there also is a positive unifying aspect. We've had some work. We're just doing something right now with the Russians on the space station. There's possibilities of global cooperation in the stars, and it is I believe, again, a way for us to focus on the future and on doing things that will help us, advance as a civilization, as humanity. I'm a firm believer in the importance of spending on space and obviously return. I mean, I think we should, and I really, really am a believer in private enterprise and encouraging individuals and companies to do this as well, because as we know, a lot of times it's it's accelerated by individuals that are trying to make money, whatever the do better, to be the first to do this, that competition's good, and I think it's a good
Excellent.
thing. I think
Elon Musk, he sent up the last rocket.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in that, and I like
Me
us
too.
I'd like us to focus on that. I'd like us to I could talk about this all day, but I really do.
Me too.
I really do believe that if our best days are in front of us, it better include a little bit of space exploration.
Yes.
And I do believe that the future is Judaism has always looked to the stars as the future. So whether it was because we're saying, look, we know that there's some connection to who we are to that. I mean, that's kind of the astrological thing, but also this idea that our future is out there, and it's not just here on this planet, but that we have this feeling, I think, in ourselves that there is something there for us for humanity somewhere else. So I'm a big believer in that, and there's a reason why so many Jews have been involved in science fiction. Isaac Asimov, Harlan Ellison, lots of other people. They have worked on that.
Only $59.95. We'll tune up and your
So,
garage door ready for one inspection to prevent any future accidents. We also
somebody's on. So, and then there was evening, there was morning, a fourth day, right? That's the creation of the stars. We got kind of occupied by that, which is interesting because day 4 is the day that kind of seems to go out of order, in the sense that the stars and the planets and those things, according to our scientific knowledge, are created at the beginning. Those are the things that predate even our planet. But again, for our ancestors, it was really interesting that they stuck that there to remind us almost that we're a part of, they're there to some extent for us. It's a very human-centric view of
Yes.
I do admit that, but there's a reason for that. And there, day 5, God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth and across the expanse of the sky, the rakia. God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. So this is, again, back to this judgment, again, saying that God, that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. So animals are commanded to be fruitful and multiplied, or if they're not commanded, they're told, or they're instructed, or the DNA, if you will, says be fertile and multiply, right? So God says be fertile and multiply, true or vu, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, 5th day. So that's the creation of life on earth, starting with the oceans and then the birds. And then it says, God said, let the earth bring forth, and again, by the way, you can see God said that it was good with all these things that were swimming around and flying around. God said, let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind. And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all the kinds of creeping things of the earth. And you notice the word kind repeated every time. Let me not, let me not, let me not, let me not. There it is. Let me not, let me not, let me not, let me not. It's used over and over again. This is very typical of this priestly author that talks about kinds, that animals have their place. and there's an animal species here, there's an animal species there, and let's keep those up. Let's keep
And they're
those
different.
from not being the same or trying to synthesize them. So that definitely with the priestly author, the idea of maybe doing crossbreeding of things would not be on the priestly author's idea of a good thing to do, because God created these things in their species to go along the line of developing the way they develop, and that's a good thing. God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all kinds of creeping things of the earth, and God saw that this was good. That's day 6. God says, but it's not over, right? God now says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. B'Tselem Elohim, that God created us, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And so this is, again, the important thing that we say, God created us in God's image. That we look like God, that we act like God, that there's something about us that is Tselem Elohim, that is like God. It's the root for, again, it's the word image. Interestingly, the word tselem in Hebrew, modern Hebrew today, is the root for photography, for taking pictures. Because again, we looked at the words and we looked at the words and said, wow, what word captures this idea of a version of something?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same. It's an image of something.
Rabbi,
That's what we have. Yeah.
I've noticed that, I don't know what kind of a translation, but it says, let us make man in our image.
Yep. So that is the translation. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh, let us make man b'tsalmenu, in our image. So people have pointed out before, who's God talking to? So, the couple of possibilities that people have offered is that God is speaking to other divine beings, namely angels. But people realize there's something wrong with that, because if the angels are created in the image of God too, then why would God create something in the image of something already? So there's already something in the image of God. It's also a possibility that God is talking about God's self as a royal we. And there is that possibility that God is speaking about the royal we, that God is royal. God is really saying me, but is saying let us. Here's what we do know. It says, whoever God is speaking to, it says, Vayivra Elohim et Hadam. It doesn't say God created or they created man and then it says in his image, but Tselem Elohim. It doesn't say God's created. It doesn't say they created. It says God created. And so the rabbis pointed out a long time ago when people would challenge us on that. Whether they were Jewish sectarians, meaning Jews who'd gone off and blended Greco-Roman religions, or even the early Christians, and said, look, this says that there's Jesus, or that there's some being, Metatron or Enoch or some other divine being here at the beginning with God. And the rabbi said, well, if God is speaking to anybody but God, which they didn't say it wasn't a possibility, God doesn't create people in any other image other than his image.
Mm-hmm.
God, it says singularly, God created, because it would have said Vayivaru. And here the word Betsalmenu is in our image. That's what the word Betsalmenu means, right? Here it says Betsalmo, that God created Betsalmo, created us in singular image. So there it's very clear that if God is speaking to other entities, that at the moment of creation, God only creates us in one image. So what is going on here? And this kind of led to an interesting discussion amongst the rabbis thousands of years ago. that maybe the angels were given a say over our creation. And some people may remember these wonderful midrashim that we've read about this, which is that when God tells the angels, I'm going to create human beings, the angels say, nah, I don't think so. That's a bad idea, God. Why? Because the angels know, because they are divine and they are eternal and they are a little bit like God in some ways more than we are. They see the future and they know what humanity is capable of doing. And they say to God, no, don't create people. Don't do it. It's a mistake. Well, there's a wonderful midrash that basically has that dialogue. And what does God do when the angels say, I'm not going to, when they say, don't create it? God destroys that whole group of angels. And then God says to another group of angels, what do? I want to create people. And they say, don't do it. And God destroys them too. So finally, God says to the last group, the third group, right? I want to create people. And the angels, these angels say, we've seen what you did to the other two groups. What difference does it make? You're going to do it anyway, so go ahead and do it. They're like, we don't think it's a good idea, but go do it. Now, the rabbis are definitely arguing an interesting point here, which is that they are human beings. They know what they and what every other human being are capable of doing. And they say, look, it would have been natural for God all-knowing, God knowing the future, for God to look at the capabilities of human beings and say, why do this?
That's what I'm thinking.
And the rabbis actually weigh in on this. The rabbis actually weigh in on this and say, you know what? It might have been better for human beings not to have been created. That maybe considering everything that we're capable of doing and all the suffering and all the destruction we are capable of and everything we do to ourselves, that maybe it would have been better for us not to be created. The rabbis say, you know what? We were created. We're here. So you know what? There must be a reason for it, and God must have really wanted us created. And so they're willing to cede all of these things. Human beings have a fatal flaw, that there's some horrible things about humanity, but God must have wanted it. And they look at these lines here in the Torah and they say, that's where you see it. When God decides to create human beings, God knows what they're capable of doing and still creates them. They're willing to say, we get it. We see your point. We concede your point, but yet God did it. So unless the whole thing's an accident, which there were people who believed that this was all an accident, that this wasn't the way things were supposed to be, the rabbis weren't willing to go down that road.
No accident.
Because that basically means that everything is wrong. Everything in the world is wrong. And there is this nihilistic tendency which exists even to this day. This nihilism existed in the Greco-Roman period in strange ways. It manifested itself in strange ways where people would literally worship darkness and worship evil because they said, we shouldn't be here. And if we are here, it's because everything is wrong. And there are still people to this day who have a nihilistic view of the universe, and they almost want the universe to be destroyed because they don't believe that it should exist. And it's a really dark take on creation. It's a really dark take on humanity, which is, it's still there. And I get it. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, I totally disagree with it, but I understand where that comes from. It comes from a dark place in the human mind, which basically says this is all bad. That this is all we all die. It's all darkness. It's all, and so it's a really bad line of looking at the world and saying, yeah, but this is bad and this is bad and this is bad. But it affects people. And there are people who probably, if they're really honest about themselves, believe that. And it's sad. It's really sad that we still fight against that nihilistic hatred almost of all things that exist.
Those that believe in Genesis.
It is one way of reading it. And it's a dark and dangerous way of kind of looking at creation. It's definitely not a Jewish way of looking at creation.
Good.
Which is that this is all here for a good reason, for God's reason, and that God must have wanted us here. And this is the takeaway, I think, of all things from creation, because look what happens. When it says God created man and woman in his image, it says God blessed them and said to them, it does say to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and all the living things that creep on earth. So that's the word that we sometimes read, and God said, fill the earth and master it, have dominion over it. God also gives them that same command, pru or vu, be fertile and multiply. Now, some people say, is that a commandment? God said to them, meaning God commanded them, right? God said to them. It doesn't say God commanded, it said God said, Vayomer, God said. But if God says to be fertile and multiply, is that the first commandment? Is that actually commandment one in the Torah? Now, there's a couple interesting ways to read that. The first is that there are people who cannot have children. So God would not command us to do something if we physically can't do it. That's one possibility and why it's not a commandment. Again, most people don't think it's the first commandment. There's also something here which they recognize this is basic human behavior. It's not anything that's Jewish behavior. It is, and again, there are people who say, yeah, but Jews say that, I mean, God says be fertile and multiply, which means we're supposed to have a lot of kids, which is why some people in the Jewish community have a lot of kids because they believe they're fulfilling this. But there's something else that we already read, which is God said the same thing to the animals. So if God says something to the animals and then says it to us, can it really be a commandment? Because animals don't have commandments. Animals don't have mitzvot. So something that is literally not maybe a commandment, but more of a direction. It's more of the way things are, the way things are going to be, but not necessarily commandment, not something that you have to do. So it's an interesting idea. Obviously, the system doesn't work unless we have people being fertile and multiplying, unless there's increase. But do we need to have people to continue to have children? One could make the argument that we might not need as many kids anymore. But I will only tell you that the question of whether this is a commandment or more of a genetic predisposition to doing these things. And we do have genetic predispositions to being fertile and increase. Bottom line. And we are given dominion over everything. And so this is pretty clear that the world is created, and definitely the life is created for us to master and to rule and to have, doesn't even say here too much protection of, but let's say that being a good steward is making sure that those things exist, right? Because if they're put in our power, then we can also destroy them. So don't want to destroy them. And of course, as we like to point out, that being given dominion over these things doesn't mean we're given permission to eat them. Because it says, God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. So here we get a description of what we are supposed to eat, which isn't even all plants, by the way. If you notice, it's plants that have seeds. It's plants that can regenerate. Very interesting. Now, is that because the Garden of Eden, that's all they had? Maybe. But it doesn't seem like God's just talking to human beings in the Garden of Eden here. As a matter of fact, keep that in mind as we read this story and read the end of the story. And to all the animals on land, and to all the birds of the sky, to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is life, I give all green plants for food. And it was so. So it seems like also here, animals aren't even given permission to eat other animals. That everything ate plants and ate vegetation that regenerated. That's a possibility, and one that the Torah at least leaves open for a possibility, which is why we said a long time ago that when the world is back in the Garden of Eden, that's when the lion lays down with the lamb, that the species stop eating each other. That's one of the things that happens when the cycle comes back to the beginning. And now here's what it says. And God saw all that he made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was a morning, the sixth day. And so here we have God saw that it was Tov Me'od, that it was very good. And again, the rabbinic understanding of what that very good meant was you and I. That God saw human beings and now makes the judgment very good. I've done everything now. So it's either humanity is now here, and that's why it's very good, which is one of the things the rabbi said, that humanity makes it very good, or the possibility that it's all done now. Everything is created on the earth, and so the totality of everything makes it very good. They're both possibilities. They're both there in the text. I think the obvious one is that it's everything, the totality of it, because it says Vayar Elohim, that God saw all that God had made, all that was made, and Hine Tov Me'od, here is very good. And again, Hine Tov Me'od, Hine, like the word here, now it's very good. So that's the end of creation, but it's not the end of the days. And this next verse, which is now part of chapter 2, is really in the Jewish reading part of the previous chapter and shouldn't be separated. Because this part now says, and the heaven and earth were finished and all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing. And he ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he'd done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. And that's the end of the first creation story. That God creates the seventh day, the Shabbat, and that day was the day that God said, everything is now done. That creation required a pause, and with that pause, creation really stopped. It didn't really stop when things stopped being created, but in the moment that God slowed down creation, if you will, and said, you know what, everything is in the works. The watch is finished, and now I can step back and let it run. That's only on the seventh day that God finally makes that decision by stopping or taking a pause. Did God stop creation, or did God continue to create, is something that the rabbis discuss. That this formative part of creation and the basic work was finished, but that God does continue to create. And those worlds maybe are still being created, but the rabbis even went even deeper, and they said every human being is a world unto themselves. And that is continuing on every day, every moment. There's a new life that comes into the world. And even more so, the rabbis said, you know what? God is part of every creation of every couple. Every husband and wife, every couple is a creation of God. It's a new world. And so God never stopped creating, because every couple, the creation of every home, is another miniature work of creation that God is a partner in. So these are interesting ideas of what it means to see creation come to a pause or to an end. They're both possibilities with the end of chapter 1. And again, the first 4 verses of chapter 2. Or first 3 verses, because chapter 4, or verse 4 of chapter 2 is another version of creation. And we know that it's a different version for a lot of reasons. And again, I'm not going to dwell on all of them and what it means. And we don't really know, because we have it as we have it. In the first version of creation, and it's very different, we have the word Elohim used extensively and exclusively for creation. That's Elohim. That's God, the word for God. Here in this version, you'll see the word Lord used. Adonai, which is the word we translate as Lord. And so in this version of creation, we see something a little different happening here. And we'll take a look at it. And we always read the second story second. there's an interesting question. If we didn't read the first story of creation, only had the second version of creation, what would we be missing? And you could say vice versa. If we had the first story and not the second story, figure out maybe too, which one resonates more to you, or which one you remembered more, or which one stands out more. It doesn't really matter because we have both. And here's how it starts. Ele toldot hashamayim. Actually, I really didn't want to do this, but I will say it's a little bit more complicated than that, because these words, Ele toldot hashamayim, v'haaretz, v'hibaram, that first part of the verse, the first up to the first period, the first clause, is really part of the previous one. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. That line, Ele toldot hashamayim, really goes up there. It's not a huge difference, but if the story begins with this version, when the Lord God made heaven and earth, when no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to till the soil, but a flow would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. He blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and placed there the man whom he formed. And from the ground the Lord caused to grow every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. A river issues from Eden to water the garden, and it then divides and becomes 4 branches. The name of the first is Pishon, the one that winds through the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, right? The gold of that land is good. Bdellium is there, and lapis lazuli. The name of the second river is the Gihon. That one winds through the whole of the land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris, and that one flows east of Ashur. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. This is the story of the Garden of Eden. And as you can see, part of the story of the Garden of Eden is to tell us that it is in a place that is the primordial watering hole, if you will, of everything. We're not exactly sure what all these rivers are. We're sure of 2 of them. Tigris and Euphrates, we still call them the Tigris and Euphrates. And the word, obviously, in Hebrew is a little different. The Tigris is called the Hidekel, is the Tigris, and the Hidekel is still a name for it in the ancient Near East. It's not always called the Tigris. That was a Greek version of those words. But the other one, Nahar al-Revi, Hu Parat, was called the Parat in the ancient Near East. That's where the word Euphrates comes from. The Parat, Euphrates means the good Parat, Euphrates in Greek. So the words that we have for them in the Greek come from other words for them, but the Euphrates, we actually still use that word in English. But the waters of the Garden of Eden water the garden, and then they go off into these different areas. Some people think the Gihon is the Nile. We're not really sure what the Pishon is. Some people said that maybe that's the Ganges River or maybe the Elo River. But there's an idea here that all of these rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, Euphrates, the Ganges, whatever, all of these primordial rivers, the ones that built up civilization, all came out of Eden. They all came out of this primordial watering place, which again, maybe the modern version of that is that this is the place where all civilization started from, because all civilization started along these rivers. Humanity started along rivers. And maybe what it's saying is that Eden is the place where humanity started, where human beings first emerged. But you can see that there doesn't seem to be other things yet in this version. And it says, the Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you are free to eat. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it. For as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. The Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a fitting helper for him. And the Lord God formed out of the earth all the wild beasts and all the birds of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whenever the man called each living creature, that would be the name. And the man gave names to all the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to all the wild beasts. But for Adam, no fitting helper was found. So all the animals were created, according to this version, for Adam. And not just for Adam, but for him to be happy and for him not to be alone. Didn't work. God did not like the resolution of that. Wasn't right. And so the Lord cast a deep sleep upon the man. While he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that spot. And the Lord God fashioned the rib that he had taken from the man into a woman. And he brought her to the man. And as we pointed out before, it may not be rib, it might be his side. It might be just from part of, part of his eternal organs, if you will. God creates woman out of that place, wherever it is, on his side. It's usually seen as his side, which is why it's usually translated as ribs, which make up the bigger part of our sides. Hopefully. I don't know. I felt a lot of other stuff there just now, but that's our ribs. And that's how a woman is created. And of course, we have a reason for that. Then the man said, this one, at last, is the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman, for from man she was taken. So she is called Isha because she was taken from the Ish. So Ish is a man, Isha is a woman, and it says that they were of one flesh. And that's the reason why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, so that they become one flesh. And the two of them were naked, the man and his wife. They did not feel any shame. So that's the way the chapter ends. Again, the chapter may not be a great break for it, but as we read up to this point, it's a very famous part of the creation story. Definitely deals with a microcosm of the Garden of Eden and of human beings. But look at this version of the story. It's a very, very, different version of creation, and it's one where God literally breathes air into us and makes us alive through God's breath. That we literally are walking around, the very first human, and it animates every person ever since, is that divine breath that comes into us. And so this is something that we recognize as literally God created us. God's hands created us. God gets dirty in our creation. God takes the mud and makes us. It's a very different version of God. And it's a very different version, again, the consequences of this are that God is really vested in us. Maybe it's the reason why in this version of creation, God is so disappointed with us too. And of course, at the very beginning, we're given this instruction that there are these trees that we're not supposed to eat from. So this is the story of the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. And the story continues. And again, look at the tone of this story. It's not just the fact that God has called something different. Look at the tone of this story, which is really about explaining how things are the way they are. The other story gives us the blueprints for how God created. This story really gives us the reasons why and gives us these kind of very mythological elements. This is much more mythological, which is interesting. It's maybe more entertaining, more dramatic. But think about it. It's also it's also trying to explain a little bit more the whys. Why was woman created? Why were these things created? Why, as we're about to see, was the serpent created? The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden?" The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat of the other fruit of the trees of the garden. It is only about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or touch it, lest you die." Now, I want to point out something. And the rabbis notice this because, again, they say there's no added words. There's no, we don't look at something and go, that's just there by accident. Do you notice what part was not there in the original command? When the serpent says to her, "Why don't you eat it?" Did God really say this? And she says to him, "We may eat of the trees, but you shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die." Anybody want to say something here? God never said you can't touch it. God didn't say that, right? Look back here. God said, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you will die. It doesn't say touch it. It doesn't say touch it, right? So there's an interesting midrash. There's an interesting explanation here. Well, why does Eve say, we may not even touch it? Well, let's look at the next line. The serpent said to the woman, "You are not going to die. But God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad." And when the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband, and he ate. So the midrash goes like this. God told them not to eat of it. Well, actually, God told Adam not to eat of it. Eve wasn't there when the command came down. And so the rabbis tell a wonderful story, a wonderful midrash, which is that when Adam is telling his wife, giving him the instructions, telling him what God said, God says to Eve, "Look at that tree there. See that tree over there? That's the tree of knowledge. We're not supposed to eat of it. And don't even look at it. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. You'll die if you touch it, Eve." Because she just said, "I'm not even supposed to touch it." When we look at it, God didn't say that. So the rabbis, it's in the midrash, the rabbis say this: the serpent did something very clever at this moment. Why does the serpent even do this, by the way? Why is the serpent trying to get us in trouble? Well, maybe because the serpent doesn't like us, right? Maybe the serpent says that, why should these people be treated any better than me? It doesn't, by the way, here seem to be that the serpent is the devil. Again, not good. He's not good, but he's not the devil necessarily. Why is the serpent like this? Again, because as an animal, he was very smart, and he was like, well, why do these people get to be people? Why do they get special treatment? And so he gets him in trouble. It says that he's shrewd. And so the rabbi said that the serpent did something very clever at this moment. As soon as he saw Eve say that, he did something cool. He went over to the tree, and usually you see the serpent wrapped around the tree, right? By the way, the serpent doesn't need to be wrapped around the tree, because at this point, the serpent has legs. He has legs. Interesting, right? It's like kind of a scary serpent with legs. The serpent touches the apple, or I said the apple. We all say it's an apple, but it says a fruit. He touches it. She says, "Look, nothing happened to me. Come over, touch it." She touches it. Nothing happens. Well, God didn't say nothing will happen. God never said that. So then he says, "Eat it. You can eat it. You can touch it." Adam said that. He's wrong. You could touch it. You can eat it too. You won't die. And so she does. And so the rabbis point out something really interesting here, which is that when you are given a commandment, don't make it harder. Don't try to complicate things by taking away more freedoms from people. If you're told not to do something, don't go a step further and tell people, don't even look at it, don't touch it. Because of course that's going to make people do it. and then they're not going to buy the whole thing. And so they teach a really important lesson here, which is not about a tree. It's about life. It's about when you give your child a lesson, or when you tell somebody something, don't make it harder. Don't create boundaries and barriers that in the end might undo everything. Because
Don't exaggerate.
yeah, and don't make things harder. Life is hard enough. We already have enough stuff we're not supposed to do. Don't make it harder, because then people won't have faith in anything. And there's a really good lesson for us right now in the midst of what we're doing right now, that when you make rules for people that become so difficult to follow, they may not follow any of them. Because if they say, look, wearing the mask or doing this or what, it's not going to make me any safer, because it doesn't make you safe. Then the whole thing people don't believe the whole thing. And there's a very interesting human reaction, which we see from the very beginning. And the rabbis pointed it out. Don't do that, because it'll mess up everything. If you really have a rule that you're supposed to, don't make it more complicated. Don't make it tougher. Don't put up stuff that's going to make the whole thing topple like a house of cards, because that's what they say happened here. Adam screwed up by making it harder for his wife. And like you just said, Joyce, lying. He exaggerated. He didn't tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, it can create a slippery slope. Maybe not a house of cards, but it becomes a slippery slope. And you wind up going, oh man, I thought that this was, and we do it all the time. We do it with things that if you tell, somebody, well, if you start doing this, then you're going to start doing that, and then you're going to start doing that. If the person does it and then it doesn't happen, then they don't believe anything else. They don't believe it anymore. And so it doesn't give you credibility. If you tell somebody not to do something because you don't want them to do it, you better have a good reason for it. And that you better not put the barrier too far away from where you really have it. And the rabbis knew that. The rabbis understood that. So here we have it. They ate from it, and again, or she ate from it, and then she gave it to her husband to eat. And then their eyes of both of them were open, and they perceived that they were naked. And they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. They heard the sound of the Lord. By the way, it says they made themselves clothes at the beginning, out of fig leaves. Then they heard the sound of the Lord God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day. And the man and his wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So here we also have God walking in the garden. It's a very, very anthropomorphic. It's a very, God is with us in this time. And by the way, it does say the breezy time of day, that God is walking through it, the breezy time of day. And the Lord called out to man and said, where are you? Ayecha, right? As I pointed out in the word Hineni, Rosh Hashanah. Hineni, here I am, is what God wanted Adam to say.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't say it. Ayecha, one word in Hebrew. And the one word in response is Hineni. Doesn't happen. Ayecha, where are you? He replied, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Then he asked, who told you you were naked? Who told you you were naked? I never told you you were naked. You didn't know anything about nakedness. Did you eat of the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat? And I love the questions because, again, God knows these things. God's asking them rhetorically, well, not rhetorically. He wants to see what Adam was going to say. And the man said, the woman you put at my side, she gave me of the tree, and I ate. And I love the fact that he doesn't, as we point out, he doesn't just blame the woman. He blames God. He doesn't just blame Eve. It would be one thing if he just simply said, the woman, she gave me the tree. No, the woman you put at my side, God. I wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for you, God. So it's a wonderful turn on God that humanity makes right away, which is it. Like every great child, right? Any true child, what do? we blame our parents. We blame our parents. I mean, their parents gave us everything. Yet when something goes wrong, it's because my parents did this to me, or my parents did that to me, or my parents gave me too much, or my parents gave me too little. It's literally what a child says, and unfortunately, sometimes adults say when they are called to be responsible. And Adam is in no way going to be responsible, because he does admit he ate, but not before he throws his wife under the bus and he throws God under the bus. He just did it. I love it because it's so human. And this is where the Torah, where you don't read it and you're just like, I know the story of the Garden of Eden. You don't know the story of the Garden of Eden if you don't remember that what Adam said was, you put her there. So the whole thing about blame Eve, not blame Eve, it's blame God. And again, it shows you human nature. The Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman replied, the serpent duped me and I ate. And so she blames the serpent. By the way, there's a midrash, and an old midrash, that the serpent was actually trying to get into Eve's pants, by the way. I want to point that out. But that is one of the things that the rabbis pointed out, that the serpent seems to be after Eve, not just after Adam's power, but after Eve in particular. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you did this, more cursed shall you be than all the cattle and all the wild beasts. On your belly shall you crawl, and dirt shall you eat all the days of your life. So the punishment for the snake, for the serpent, was pretty big, which is that serpents are not living a good life, at least according to our understanding. They crawl around on the dirt, and that's like the worst thing you could do, is be on your belly. And not only that, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They shall strike at your head, and you shall strike at their heel. That's why we don't like snakes. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. And snakes are scary to a lot of people. The explanation for why they are like that to us goes back to the garden. So that's the snake. That's the serpent. Now crawls. Didn't crawl. That meant it didn't crawl before. And to the woman he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing. In pain shall you bear children. That your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. So here we have women get punished with two things. Well, maybe three things, but really the two things are, you're going to have pain in childbirth. It's a reality. They're basically saying that's the way it's going to be. And the weird thing, of course, is that you're going to go through that pain willingly. You're going to want it. Even with that pain, you're going to want to do it. So that's what makes it so crazy, is that it's going to be painful and you're going to want that pain. But then here's the other part that, of course, people have always been upset about, which is your husband's going to rule over you. And so this is an explanation, again, for how things were that maybe shouldn't have been.
I keep telling Mary that, and she just doesn't go for it.
Maybe because you're not supposed to do this. Maybe
Well, it says it right there. I keep quoting the Bible.
No, but the point is that this is not the way things were supposed to be. So there's an interesting idea here that I've always kind of kept in my mind. These are all explanations for why the things we and we're going to read next week that human beings are given finally permission to eat animals. But it's not the way things were supposed to be. So I've always wondered, can humanity develop far enough so that we can go back to the way we were in the Garden of Eden? So that can we ever get back to a point where we're the way God intended creation to be? So we can always say, well, that's just the way things are. But that's not really the way things were supposed to be. So did God have in mind a perfect way for there to be a balance where this isn't really the situation? Now, again, one can make the argument, yeah, but women give birth in pain. Well, not anymore. Not if they have enough. Not if they have enough nerve blockers and epidurals and things like that. So maybe we're getting to a point where some of these things are not the same the way that they are anymore. Now, again, you could say, yeah, but you take away those pain blockers, and even a woman in the 21st century is going to have a whole lot of pain.
Well, that's not true either, Rabbi, because now you can create babies in test tubes.
Well, that's the interesting point. So if we get to a point where we could have full gestation, not just creation, but gestation outside of the womb, extra utero, as they say, is it possible for us to actually see a time when we do get back to this original idea of the way things were meant to be? And if that's the case, the other thing that you could say about that is that men are not meant to rule over women, in the sense that that is a punishment for our initial screw up. And that was not the way that it would have been at first. Now, what's Adam's curse? Because Adam's where it all started, and then it kind of goes in reverse, right? It goes Adam, Eve, and the serpent, and then it goes serpent, Eve, and Adam in the punishment, right? It goes backwards. It's an interesting structure. It's not atypical. To Adam, he said, because you did as your wife said, and ate of the tree about which you were commanded, you shall not eat of it. Cursed be the ground because of you. By toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So what are you going to eat? You're going to eat stuff that comes out of the ground. And it isn't going to be easy. Thorns and thistles shall sprout. It's easy for you to say. Thorns and thistles shall it sprout for you. And then Hebrew, that's the kutz, the dardar. Thorns and thistles, dardar. Kutz, kind of very onomatopoeia. It's like, yeah, kutz. I got kutz. I got thorns. And it says, by the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy work. That's bad. I'm not going to just provide for you anymore. You're going to have to work for it. But that's not the worst part. Until you return to the ground from where you were taken. For dust you are, for dust you shall return. So was humanity originally not supposed to die? That's an interesting possibility, which is that being created from the earth, we return to it. But did God intend for us to be returned back to the earth? Interesting possibilities. It's kind of, again, an explanation for why things are the way they are. This is why we are human. This is why we are returned back to the earth. And it says the man named his wife Eve, Chava, because she was the mother of all Chai. So the word Chava is Chai, life. She's called life. Eve is life. That's what her name means. So we just use the name Eve. But when we think about what the word Chava, what the name Eve really means, it means life. And the Lord God made garments of skins for Adam and his wife and clothed them. So we read that they originally made clothes for themselves, but the implication here seems to be they're not that good at making clothes. Because first of all, it says at the beginning, if you notice the story, that they were naked. Well, it said that they made loincloths for themselves from fig leaves. Well, that's not really good clothing. That's really low quality clothing. Here it says that God made clothes of skins for them. And this clothing was God's handiwork. Really good tailoring when God makes it for you. And again, there's an understanding that these robes, this clothing, this divinely made clothing never ends, right? And so if you have this clothing, it's like magical clothing. It's divine clothing. And so Adam and Eve are clothed in these garments. Powerful clothes, immortal clothes, magical clothes. And it says now, the Lord God said, and now again, it seems like he's speaking to other entities. Now that man has become like one of us, Mimenu, it is the word us. Not like me, but like us. Knowing good and bad. What if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and live forever? I can't have human beings have godlike powers of knowledge, creation, and also live forever. So here again, it seems to be this understanding that human beings might have lived forever if they had stayed in the Garden of Eden. That maybe that garden was meant for Adam and Eve to be together forever, with nothing else other than the two of them and living forever. But what would that life have been like? What would that existence have been like if it is only the two of them and it's only...
But he had already said, be fruitful and multiply.
Now, in all fairness, that's the other version of the story.
Oh,
This story really does seem to be telling us that God, if God didn't intend for this to happen, God put everything in motion for us to have the way of life and death that we have. But this was all part of, if not God's original intent, this is what happened because of the way things are. And so this is more of an explanation for why things are the way they are, rather than maybe, if you will, that it was intended like that. The initial creation story really gives this kind of idea that this is what God wanted. God put everything in motion and it's all kind of going along God's plan. This version is more like God started messing around with stuff, had human beings here, had a garden, and let's see how this thing rolls out. And it didn't kind of roll out maybe the way God intended to. Or again, it's God's letting this stuff happen and making it, and kind of like, well, this is the way it's going to have to be now. Because here's God's command. God's decision. God's decision is Lord God banished them from the Garden of Eden to till the soil from which he was taken. He's not going to do it here. He's not going to do it around the tree of life. And he drove the man out and stationed east of the Garden of Eden, and that's where we have the word east of Eden, the cherubim, the kruvim, and the fiery, ever-turning sword to guard the way to the tree of life. So we can't go back. We can't go back there. God prevents us from ever going back to that place. Is there a time when we get to go back to that place? You know, look, for the rabbis, this was heaven. Going back to this place is going back to heaven. When we die, we go to the Gan Eden, we go back to the garden. And that we're there in Gan Eden with all of our relatives, all the people that have been created since are in the Garden of Eden forever, and for eternity, in paradise. But human beings can't come in their lifetime. It's where we get this idea from. There's now a separation between paradise and where we are, east of Eden. We're all east of Eden. Right? We're on that outside looking in, or on the outside until we die. And now we're going to finish with the end part. And I said there's a lot in this first chapter, in this first portion. And let's read the last part. The man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. So now we get names, not just of things and people, and now each child in this author, we have an explanation for why these names are the way they are, including even up through Jacob's children. We have their name and why they're named that. The names mean something. Eve is given the name, as we just read. I've gained a child with the help of the Lord. Gained kaniti. Cain comes from the word in Hebrew kaniti. I acquired. I purchased is also the word for kaniti. It means I acquired. I purchased. And then she bore his brother Abel, Havel. And Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. By the way, we haven't had Abel's name explained yet. Abel's name was not explained yet. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil. And Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of the flock. And the Lord paid heed to Abel and to his offering. But to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. Cain was much distressed, and his face fell. And the Lord said to Cain, why are you distressed, and why is your face fallen? Why is it sad? Why is it fallen? Why are you sad? Surely, if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do what is right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. Tim shal bo, va'ata tim shal bo. You can be its master. And so this is a mini story of the Cain and Abel story. Cain and Abel both bring the offerings, and Cain's is not liked. Abel's is. Now, again, a lot of people say, why? Right? Well, as we read, Abel gave, it says, the choice. He gave the choicest of it, the first one. Cain just brought his stuff, whereas Abel really selected the best. So maybe it's because of that. There's also this kind of idea that Cain and Abel both represent things that are different ways of life. Cain represents the farmers. He represents civilization that develops around agricultural revolution, whereas Abel represents the nomads, the pastoralists, the people who live life based on what they can raise and don't organize in cities. And this story actually reflects the encroachment of the agricultural revolution on the pastoral way of life, the nomadic way of life, which of course is the way that Avraham lives. And by the way, by choice, because we remember, as we're going to read in a few weeks, Avraham is commanded to go and become a pastoralist. He lived in Ur of the Chaldees. He lived in a city until God tells him to go back, to go to Israel and to be a nomad. And so that's an interesting thing that we see in the Torah, which is a definite value judgment that the way of the nomad is maybe a simpler, more nostalgic way of living, which has a better set of values. And you don't live like a city dweller who is living on top of everybody and is living in a world that has slavery and has people taking advantage of each other and having a hierarchy where you have different class civilization. That's the train going by right now. So there's a lot going on here, but I love the way this story ends. And I played a song by a modern folk rock group, Mumford and Sons, for Simchat Torah, the song Tim Shel, which is actually from the Hebrew word here, Tim Shol, which means you can be its master. The translation for this idea of sin, right, or of this is a very famous phrase, and it's used in East of Eden, which is why Mumford and Son used it. In the book East of Eden, Steinbeck talks about the characters try to teach about how to live a life, and one of the characters, the mentor character, tries to teach the kids how to live, and he quotes this section, which is why the song exists, that what you don't have to do bad. You don't have to do bad. You can do good. You don't have to do bad. You can be its master. You can master your behavior. And the word Tim Shel means you can do it. It doesn't say you have to or that you will or that you must, but that you can. And that is the lesson that we have in Judaism, really. And Steinbeck picks up on it beautifully, that it is our choice. It is our responsibility. It's our power to do it. We're not fated to do it, and we're not fated not to do it. But it's the choice to do the good things and to conquer our impulses that make us great. And that's the line. It's the choices that make man great. And that is the lesson in this mini story. But of course, we don't focus on this part. We focus on the next part. What happens next? And you know what happens next. Cain said to his brother, and you notice blank, blank, blank. We don't have what he says to him. He said something. Cain said something to Abel. We don't know what it is. It's missing, which is why we have the ... We don't have it. And when they were in the field, Cain set upon his brother Abel and killed him. And we remember that part. A brother killing another brother, which teaches us again, And there are a lot of people who've said it, but I like the way Dennis Prager said it years ago. I heard him say it. If a brother can kill a brother, all bets are off. Don't ever think that something's not capable of happening, because if a brother can kill another brother in the setup that we have, it's possible for it to happen. Don't say it can't happen. And the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And again, God knows the answer. But again, the question's posed. And of course, Cain doesn't answer. He doesn't answer truthfully. He doesn't answer the question. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? One of the most famous lines in the Bible.
Mhm.
Which is, again, what human beings are very capable of doing, which is not taking responsibility. That is the line which we use as the paramount example of what not to say to God. And he said, God said, what have you done? Hark, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. And the interesting thing the rabbis point out is it doesn't say dam, which is blood. It says demeh, demeh, his bloods. And the rabbis say, why is it damim? Why is it not dam? Blood can be one person's blood. And the rabbi said it's because it wasn't just his blood. It was all of his descendants that never came about in the world. A whole line of humanity was snuffed out at the beginning. A whole line. What would humanity have been like with Abel as an ancestor? We don't know. They were killed. And so all of the blood of all those billions of people is snuffed out in a moment. And so God says to him, therefore you shall be more cursed than the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the earth. So your father, Adam, had it rough. You're going to have it even worse. And you shall wander the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Since you've banished me this day from the soil, and I must avoid your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth, anyone who meets me may kill me. Now, who's he talking about? There's only a few people on the earth. Is it his parents? Are there other people here? Or did Abel already have kids? Are Cain kids going to kill him? And how long does this go on for? And so there is an interesting understanding that Cain never dies, that Cain is the ultimate human witness, if you will, that Cain is a forever restless wanderer, forever. And what happens? God says, I'm not going to let you get killed. The Lord said to him, I promise, if anyone kills Cain, sevenfold vengeance shall be taken on him. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who would meet him should kill him. So Cain has a mark placed on him, on his forehead, on his body. We don't really know. But it's a mark that everybody knows is the mark of Cain. Mark of Cain. And no one's supposed to kill him. Cain left the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And again, even further east. So the people keep moving east. They're moving east. Cain knew his wife. And so it doesn't seem like there were kids yet. Maybe they were. Maybe they already had kids. There's another line of kids. We don't know. And she conceived and bore Enoch. And he then founded a city and named the city after his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mehuael. Mehuael begot Methusael, and Methusael begot Lamech. And Lamech took to himself two wives. The wife name of one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Adah bore Jabal, who is the ancestor of all who dwell in tents in the midst of herds. And the name of the other brother was Jubal. He was the ancestor of all who played the lyre and the pipe. This is where musicians come from, Jubal. As for Zillah, she bore Tubal-Cain, who forged all implements of copper and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So these are people who work as blacksmiths. And Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. O wives of Lamech, give ear to my speech. I have slain a man for wounding me, and a lad for bruising me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. So this guy Lamech is like a murderer. He's a rough guy. And he says to his wives, if Cain is going to be avenged, I'm really going to be avenged. It doesn't seem like humanity's going down a very good road right now. So this is the line of Cain. Doesn't seem like things are going really well there. But that's not all of humanity. Because here we have, and we forget that we're not of the line of Cain. We're of the line of Seth. And this is what we're going to finish with right now. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, meaning God has provided me with another offspring in the place of Abel. And of course, Seth doesn't mean all of that. It means God has given me another child. For Cain had killed him. And to Seth in turn a son was born, and he named his son Enosh. And it was then that man began to invoke the Lord by name, that God started to be known by the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Adonai. And this is the record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. And again, this goes back to the beginning story, maybe the priestly author, again, maybe that sound of God being created in the image of man. And male and female, he created them. When they were created, he blessed them and called them man. Seems like we went back to that version. And here's this version. Adam had lived 130 years. He begot a son in his likeness and named him Seth. So in this version, only Seth is born. We don't have Cain and Abel being born. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Adam came to 930 years, 800 plus 130, and he died. And Seth lived 105 years, and he begot Enosh. And after the birth of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years. So almost as long, but a little less. He begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth came to 912 years, and he died. By the way, there's a midrash, just share with you the midrash about Adam. Adam lives 930 years, and the rabbis point out that seems remarkably similar to 1,000 years, but 70 years shy. Why is he 70 years shy? And there's a wonderful midrash here that's a lifetime, right? 70 years is a lifetime. So it's almost like Adam got several lifetimes, but he got one lifetime short, or 70 years got cut off of his life. And the rabbis point out it actually goes back to the fact that Adam gets to see the future, and he gets to see all the people that are going to come after him, all his descendants. And he learns about this wonderful boy that's going to be born, and his name is David. And David is going to die as a child, as an infant. But he realizes that if Adam survives, that if David survives, he's going to be a great king. He's going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the leader of the Jewish people, the builder of Jerusalem. And so Adam says to God, give my 70 years, take 70 years off of my life and give it to David. And that way David can live. And so it's a wonderful midrash on why Adam lives just shy of 1,000 years. He gave up a lifetime. He gave it up for David. It's a nice little midrash there. So Enosh has a child named Canaan. And after the birth of Canaan, Enosh lives 850 years. And he begot sons and daughters. All the days of Enosh's life, 905 years. So we're moving down a little bit, not quite living as long. And Canaan lived 70 years, and he begot Mahalalel. And after the birth of Mahalalel, Canaan lived 840 years and begot sons and daughters. And all his life came to 910 years. It went up a little bit, but still about 910 years. Mahalalel lived 65 years. He begot Yared. And after the birth of Yared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel came to 895, and then he died. And you notice that the P author, or this author, whatever you want to say, this part of the Torah, we get ages, how long they were lived before they had a baby, and how long they lived after they had a baby, and who at least one of their children was. The line that we're following, which is the line that's going to take us to Noah. It says that other sons and daughters are born. It says other people are there. But it says that this is the line that we're following. We're following a family tree. All the days of Mahalalel was 895. And then it says, Yared lived 162 years and he begot Hanoch. After the birth of Hanoch, Yared lived 800 years and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Yared came to 962 years and then he died. Well, just popped back up. Just popped back up almost as long as Adam lived. So we went back to living a long life. Really long, well, they all long lives. Really long lives. When Enoch was 65 years, he begot Methuselah. And after the birth of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch became 365. Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, for God took him. Well, that's strange, because number one, he only lives 365 years, which, by the way, that seems like a strange number. 365 years, one for every day of the year. They knew that. They had a calendar on the Egyptian side, at least, where it went to 365. So that seems odd. And it also seems very, very odd that he walked with God and was no longer. Did he die? It doesn't seem like he just died. It seems like he did something. And so we have wonderful literature about Enoch, that Enoch actually goes up to heaven and becomes like an immortal being during his lifetime, that he doesn't die a normal death. Something was very special about Enoch. And we really don't know, but there's speculation. Of course, we have a book of Enoch. We have a book that talks about, not in the Hebrew Bible, but in the Apocrypha, that talks about why Enoch was what he was, which was not like other people. But what we know about Enoch is that he has a son named Methuselah. And Methuselah lived 187 years, and he begot Lamech. And after the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and begot sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah came to 969 years. And then he died, which means he lived longer than anybody. He lived 969 years. That's longer even than Adam. So that's why we still say to this day, he's as old as Methuselah, right? You can't get any older than Methuselah. He lives 969 years. And it says, when Lamech had lived 182 years, he begot a son. And he named him Noah, saying, this one will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands, out of the very soil which the Lord placed under the curse. And after the birth of Noah, Lamech lived 595 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days of his life came to 777 years, and he died. And when Noah was 500 years, he begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's the story of Noah, but it's not the end of the portion. So we're going to finish off with one of the strangest sections in the whole Hebrew Bible, the next 6 verses, which I will leave you with and tell you we don't know what's going on here. But before I do that, I want to tell you one other thing which you just saw. Noah in Hebrew. Noah's father's name is Lamech. Well, we just read about a Lamech. We read about a Lamech. He was the last generation from Cain's descendants. So are there 2 Lamechs, or are there 2 versions of a genealogy where one is the line of Cain and one is the line of Seth? We don't know. It is interesting that the names are repeated, and it's not just Lamech. As you saw in the other line, we have a Methusael, which sounds a lot like Methuselah. So we don't really know. The possibility that that other one was definitely, well, I would say definitely, but the idea, of course, is that if we believe that there's different authors at play, that other lineage was from the J author. This one's the P author. This is the author who's concerned with how long somebody lives, how old they were when they had a kid, how many kids they had, those kind of things, those details. The J author is not interested in that. So we do have two different authors writing the genealogy. Are they talking about the same people? We don't know. We don't know. But the names do repeat. And they don't repeat exactly, but they're very close. So, I mean, some of them repeat exactly, but some of them are very, very close, even if they don't repeat. So we don't know for sure. It is possible that maybe they're drawing on a similar tradition. We have both versions. That's all I can tell you. So when we get to Noah, we know his 3 sons. The other people, we don't read all their children. Noah, we read about all 3 of his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, because all of humanity are descended from those 3 sons. Those other descendants of all those other people we just read about, folks, none of them lived. Not that they're not important. They're not important to the story because none of those other people lived. All those other lines that came out of Enoch and Yared and all these other people, Methuselah, all of other Methuselah's other kids, they don't live. Lamech lives, and then Noah lives, and his son. So what happened to Lamech, by the way? Where was he when the flood happened? Where was Methuselah when the flood happened? Well, I guess if you kind of do the math, Methuselah died the day before the flood, or right around the time of the flood, he died. And if you do the math, Lamech only lives to be 777 years. So he would have died before the flood too. So that really only Noah and his family were left. So let's read. And we're not going to right up to before the flood. And maybe again, we get the reason for the flood. When man began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them. By the way, we've just covered thousands of years of history because you read how long these people lived for. When men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine being saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives among them that pleased them. And the Lord said, my breath shall not abide in man forever. Since he too is flesh, let the days of him be allowed 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on the earth, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men who bore them offspring. There were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. And the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and all the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor in the Lord. So the story is very scary the way it ends, but it ends on a happy note. That Noah is hope. That Noah is going to be, is going to make things okay, even in the midst of all this. So these verses are very strange. We will tell you, I will tell you, people who know the Bible, study the Bible will tell you, we don't know what's going on in these verses. These verses that talk about the Nephilim, we don't know what's going on here. The people who wrote the story, or when this story was first told, they understood these things. They knew the references. They knew what the Nephilim were. We don't know what they were. The Nephilim are, the word Nephilim means the fallen ones. Are these fallen angels? Are these aliens? Speculation, again, lots of speculation. What we know is that it wasn't the way things were supposed to be again. We have another version of this story, of the creation story, where things aren't going to plan.
We went to 9:15.
Yes, I know. I know what time it is. So we're finishing it. We finished up. We have to explain this, folks, and we're going to see it next week.
There's no explaining this.
There is no explaining why these things happened, but they happened. And again, the Torah is trying to tell us that God had to fix it. But the point here is that the Torah does say, and this author, whether you're going to say the author or the Torah, whatever we have, it says that God did not like the way things were going. That God had to fix things because things were not going the way he wasn't happy with the way things were going. And it says specifically that God regretted the way things were. God regretted that he made man on the earth, and his heart was sad, and God's heart was sad. And God said, again, I regret that I made this. And so God has to fix it. And fixing it's going to require starting over to some extent. Not from the beginning, because God doesn't wipe everybody out. But here we have a story. Now, why do we have this story? Did it happen? Did it not? I mean, what's going on here? Look, we know, we're going to read next week, every culture that we know had a flood story.
Mhm.
Every culture had a flood story. And most people believe today that it reflects a true event in human history, a global catastrophe that changed the course of life on earth. The Torah is giving us a take of that, which is that something happened, and it happened because God had to make it happen. God had to start over. And what we take away from our flood story is very different from what every other culture took away from the flood story. And so what you could say is that the flood happened, but even more so, people knew the flood happened. And we couldn't have our Bible, couldn't ignore this, couldn't ignore it. And we have, just as we have two versions of creation, we have two versions of the flood story. In this case, they're woven together. They're not one version and then the next version, like chapter 1 and 2. We have the stories that we're about to read in chapter 6, and chapter 7, where the stories are woven together. It's hard to see necessarily sometimes where this one story begins and where one ends because it's woven together like a tapestry. But we have two versions of it, which means that there was a very important story. We know it's an important story because every culture had the story. And so we couldn't ignore the story. I will say this. The fact that it happened is important. The fact that we contextualized it and tried to learn from it is very important, and again, is very Jewish. And we will come back to that next week. And I remind you, when we celebrate the story of Noah, we're also going to bless our animals. And that's why not this Saturday, but next Saturday, we're going to have the blessing of our pets. And as my daughter just came behind me again and said, "Did you tell everybody we're getting a dog?" I don't know if you heard that about 15 minutes ago, but she did say that. So she is very excited. And I've said it again now, Shira, that we're getting a dog. So I think we're getting a dog.
What are you going to name it?
What are we going to name it, Shira?
Noah.
What are we naming it?
Noah.
No.
You should name it Kelef.
What? His name is Max right now. The one that she thinks she's getting, his name is Max. So we're either going to keep Max or we're never going to name him?
I don't know.
What did you want to name him?
I don't know. Haven't thought about it.
Yes, you have.
What?
What did you say you wanted to call him?
Simba.
Simba. She wants to call him
That's what I have. We have a Simba.
I know. I don't know. And she doesn't, I don't think she knew that. What? Yeah, one of the dogs is Ezekiel. Anyways, this is a wonderful adventure that I'm on. No. All right,
Kid
everybody.
too.
Stay healthy. Give me strength. And stay healthy, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, if not before. Yes, I'll show you the dog.
Tuesday.
Or Tuesday morning, but yes. Bring the dog. Bye-bye, everybody.